Hello.
Hi, that was so great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Adrienne LaFrance. I'm the Atlantic's executive editor, and I want to just start by saying thank you so much to the University of Chicago for hosting us. This is really exciting to be here, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us. And Maria, it's an honor to get to share the stage with you.
She was the grown-up. I should have said all those things too. Thank you. Thanks, Adrienne.
So we're going to have a brief conversation. I want to ask you some questions,
Sure.
and then we'll open it up to your questions too. So please be thinking about what you'd like to ask Maria. We'll have some mic runners for that in just a little bit. But I want to start. I mean, I want to go to some of the solutions just because that's such a key to how we move forward. But I want to start by going back a little bit, and specifically to the start of Rappler.
Can I say?
Sure.
Okay, so when she was still with Neiman Lab, she was the first West American reporter to write about Rappler.
We go way back.
2013, 2012.
2012, something like that,
2012.
yeah.
Like, so this is how I know Adrienne. So I was really psyched she headed the
So
Watch her.
we go way back, right? And when we talked all those years ago, like 10 years ago, I remember you said something, because Rappler, for those who don't know it very well, and you should, of course, all go read it, I mean, its DNA is sort of part social network, part news organization, and it's always been that way. And so you're kind of fascinatingly, presciently predisposed for the situation you're now in, I would say. And I'm curious to hear about, something we talked about all those years ago was how, your preoccupation with emotional contagion. And I remember you saying something to me to the effect of, we need to create informational environments where people can be rational and not just emotional. That was 10 years ago. Here we are now. When you think back to sort of what your dreams were for Rappler when you started, what's your primary observation about what's changed, other than it's gotten worse? And do you still feel like that's the core mission? Is it enough?
My God, there are three things that are there right off the top. So we came out with a mood meter and a mood navigator like a few years before Facebook did the emoji. But the reason for the mood meter was because I wanted to see how a story impacted our society emotionally, right? And it was actually used by several universities to look at sharing, how people share online, and it's based on valence, arousal, and dominance.
Well, and you had readers, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you had readers actually respond like, this article makes me angry, or
Right.
and
Correct.
anger was
Correct.
one of them, as I recall.
Correct. No, but at that point in time, until 2016, the top emotion was happy in the Philippines, right? So we really looked at this stuff, and we knew when people were angry because it wasn't being gamed and we weren't manipulating. So the question that you had is social contagion. Like, I thought that if you click how you feel, that would stop you and make you think, and because you stop to think, you become more rational. This is what our conversation was like. And part of the reason was because, and again, we go back evil to good to evil. That's kind of, I began looking at social network theory when I was looking at how the virulent ideology of terrorism spreads, right? So how did Al-Qaeda's, how did they convince people in Southeast Asia, and the Al-Qaeda's arm was called the Jamaat Islamiyah, to actually blow themselves up, right? How do you do that? And so when I was looking at that, and I looked at how to create social cascades, we looked at emotions. We all know emotions are important. I was hoping, again, against hope, that we could use it for good. And we still do, because we don't manipulate you with the algorithms. We don't micro-target you. We don't collect the kind of data that you now give freely to, we all give freely. I mean, that's our devil's Faustian bargain. We're on the losing end, right? So we're to fast forward to today. I haven't given up, but this is why I believe that we need to get legislation in place that our data should be ours, that Section 230 should be killed, because in the end, these platforms, your technology platforms, are not like the telephone. They decide, they weigh in on what you get. And the primary driver is money. It's surveillance capitalism. So the micro-targeting, it's like going to a psychologist, I'm gonna quote Tristan Harris, going to a psychologist and telling the psychologist your deepest, darkest secret, and then that psychologist goes around and says, yo, who wants this? Who's the highest bidder? I got Adrienne's secret. That's kind of what we're doing. You know, so it's a bleak moment, Adrienne. Let's put it that way. Like, let's see what happens in our elections, because Facts First PH is working. Otherwise, why do we have a whole new spate of cases or complaints? They're just legal complaints now. But I'll give you an idea for what that means. And I know I can say this. I know we have a live stream. But what that means is for a person running a news group, that I have to worry about the people named on that complaint, that they could be picked up on the last day of right before Easter vacation. So that would be like Holy Thursday in the Philippines. Everything shuts down for Easter. And when that happens, if they're arrested, they will stay in jail until the Monday after, right? So these are the kinds of harassment we have to deal with. It makes me very angry.
As it should. Can we talk a little bit about, a little bit more on that, and I want to go back to the sort of architecture of the social web as it should be and what we need to do. But in terms of, I'm really curious to hear you talk about, press freedom in the Philippines has not been robust historically, and yet it seems to have gotten particularly bad in recent years. Certainly you've experienced this firsthand. Can you talk about, especially for an audience of many Americans, what it is like to experience that slide, and especially the things that people may not notice are changing around them as the ground sort of shifts underneath them?
I talked about, so first press freedom, in 1986, so 36 years ago, a people power revolt ousted Ferdinand Marcos and his whole family. So look, I'm gonna go back to history. Ferdinand Marcos declared victory in the 1986 elections, and in 4 days, the people came out on the streets, and by the 4th or 5th day, the US helicopters took the family out of the Philippines, right? That's the people power revolt, helped global movements, and we all thought democracy was here to stay, how wrong we were. 36 years later, our elections are emblematic, because part of the reason that Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is winning is in the statistical survey.
And quite popular.
Winning, yes, maybe no. How do you look at the impact of disinformation, right? And we've exposed this starting in 2014. That was when these networks began. When you pound it, you can change history in front of your eyes. That's what happened to us. And if he wins, partly that will be because of this, right? So, emblematic of the battle for facts. That's why the battle for facts is critically important. If we lose this, I don't think it's ours alone. Look, in 1986, people power brought freedom of the press, and our governments, no president has really ever liked me completely in the Philippines. That's okay.
That's a good thing as a journalist.
Right, I don't mind, right? So long as they respect you or they think you're fair, which is all we're after. But today it's so much different. And I think it's not even that they want to, it's not about you. They don't need you. They'll create their own, right? So they're like Alex Jones in the States. We now have a group in the Philippines. This is the one, the preacher of President Duterte. His name is Apollo Quiboloy. He's wanted by the FBI for sex trafficking. But he has one of the largest Facebook pages for disinformation. And he just received a television franchise from the government in a midnight deal. So what they do is, instead of actually dealing with a journalist, they just create their own. If people can't tell fact from fiction, it's gonna be who you like. You don't like the way I look, you like Adrienne better. It's that simple, right? Or she makes you feel better, or she makes you feel angrier, then you listen to that. How do we protect the facts, right? So look, it happened to you, and it's happening to you. And Americans tend to think that, that you're immune because you're smart.
Well, so what do you think Americans, whether journalists or just individuals, institutions, what should people be doing now or yesterday or 5 years ago to prevent what's happened in the Philippines, or to prevent the beginnings of what we've already seen here in terms of freedom of expression, press freedom, slide into authoritarianism, all of it?
The manipulation isn't about how smart or how not smart you are. The manipulation is our biology. It's your biology. It's the manipulation of your emotions. So the minute you get angry, right, don't share yet. I mean, I talked about valence, arousal, and dominance, right? So I'll take this first in the virtual world, and then I'll go into democratic in the physical world. Valence is how content makes you feel. Arousal is the kind of emotion you feel. So anger is high arousal. Sadness is low arousal. You're more prone to share high arousal versus low arousal. And dominance is how empowered you feel in the moment. So what people share the most, so for example, if people are afraid, like we were in the Philippines for long periods of time, you don't share, you know, because low dominance. Now take that into the real world. What's happening in the virtual world is exactly how we're supposed to vote. You're still lucky. You don't feel fear for your safety yet, you know, but democracy is so fragile. And all of it rests on what we believe, on the facts, on that shared reality. So I guess we're the guinea pigs for you, right? So this is what Cambridge Analytica, the whistleblower Christopher Wiley, said about the Philippines. He called us the petri dish. And he said that Cambridge Analytica and the parent company, SCL, I think you wrote about this, tested these tactics of manipulation, of mass manipulation in countries like the Philippines, Kenya, Nigeria, the global south, because you can get away with it. And then if they worked in our countries, the word he used is they ported it over to you. It works in ours, it works in yours.
Let's talk about the platforms for a minute. I know you mentioned TikTok earlier, which I also want to hear your views on, but I'll ask a sort of oversimplified question just to get your reaction. If you had like a magic wand and could make one of the platforms go away, I don't know, Google, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, obviously some of those entities own one another, but which concerns you most and which one's absence would make us, humanity, better off?
I think we have to do the same with all of them, which is, you know, they cannot insidiously manipulate us. If you've heard me talk, I talk about genetic research, for example, right? And CRISPR technology. Our technology is much smarter than our technology is manipulating. Like CRISPR technology can basically customize your baby. But in our countries, in your country, you cannot do that. You put guardrails because you know we don't have the wisdom of gods. But we don't do that in our minds. Right? This is, so all the platforms, but I'll say this, right? Because I'll answer your question directly. And I'll put it in the Philippines. You tell me in the US, right?
It's a hard one. I'll tell you.
Okay, so in the Philippines, Facebook is the world's largest delivery platform of news. And for the 6th year in a row last year, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. That's why we're like your Drosophila fruit flies. We're the guinea pigs. But the other part is because 100% of Filipinos on the internet, 100% are on Facebook. YouTube, as early as 2013, Filipinos uploaded and downloaded the most number of videos on YouTube globally. And then here's the other part, right? So if disinformation, like the historical denialism of the Marcos disinformation networks, they would start on YouTube. When they are shared on Facebook, Facebook doesn't actually check that because the content isn't on Facebook. Right? So here it is. It's an entire ecosystem of manipulation. I do not understand why we allow that. It's not me. I'm just the victim. Please do something about it. It's you. You got more power than I do. So Adrienne, here in the United States.
I mean, my short answer would be Facebook and Google have been most consequential for news organizations and the informational environment in that way, but I think I really worry about YouTube. I think it's a sort of under scrutinized, and Google for that matter too. I think the extent to which we've just totally outsourced our relationship with knowledge to Google is frightening. So all of them, maybe TikTok is also, I mean,
and that's the newest black box, right, where everyone has gone in. And I think our other problem with this is that we news people, I'm looking at them, we actually voluntarily gave away our deepest relationships when we put a share button on our websites.
Rappler doesn't have that, does it?
We do, because we were born on Facebook, right? I drank the Kool-Aid. And that's also...
Everybody did. I mean, the whole industry did.
Exactly. So here's the other part that's for news people, right? Right now, we are letting the technology platforms determine what news survives. And we already know what the algorithms amplify. So what news will survive?
So relatedly, how should we change? I know you mentioned Section 230, and we could get into that or not. It's wonky quickly. But how should we change the sort of architecture of the social web to both allow for dissent, which, by the way, is also very important for democracy, and not, hopefully avoid tech companies making all of the big decisions on our behalves, but also hopefully prevent harm and abuse?
It's not a free speech issue. This is not a free speech issue. Like, don't believe the lie. This is actually that algorithm and the data. This is tech and data. That's what we need to look at. Because, look, I can turn to my neighbor and tell a lie, right? You can tell your neighbor a lie, but it won't get amplified to 10 million people, right? It's the distribution that's the problem. So, to quote a comedian, it's a freedom of reach issue, not a freedom of speech issue. Sacha Baron Cohen said this. He had more wisdom than we did. I'm just saying, right? So freedom of speech has never been the problem. It's just a good way to have you looking at that. Because if we're creating Supreme Courts for content, how slowly does the Supreme Court for content work? And how quickly does the virality of lies spread? That's the gap. Right? Did I mention I'm part of the real Facebook oversight?
Well, and I was going to say, and who's in charge of making those decisions is another huge question. You should talk for a minute about what the real oversight board is and the other oversight board.
The real Facebook oversight board was really when your elections were coming up, we were alarmed. And these are people like Shoshana Zuboff, Carol Cadwalader, who broke the Cambridge Analytica story. Shoshana Zuboff is my new, I won't say other things that may be politically incorrect. I was saying, that model of, it's 750 pages, her book. If you haven't read it, you should, because I think the repercussions are huge for us, but it is power and money, and that is part of what's wrong. So we need to fix this, right? What is the source of the inordinate corporate gain that these companies have had? It's all of our data. It's our personal lives. So if you think about what our internet should look like, it's not that hard to imagine it. The laws in the real world, which have checks and balances, which protect both individual rights and the public sphere, those need to be reflected in the virtual world.
Say a little more specifically what you mean. So I'll give an example. Some people would argue, I think Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, has said, for instance, that to the point about freedom of reach, as you put it, that we should have circuit breakers basically for when something's about to go extremely viral, so there's sort of a check before it does. Obviously, I for a long time argued for better content moderation, which is a very journalistic way of looking at things. I've since come to the view that that's not going to be what solves our problems. But speak a little bit more specifically about when you talk about protecting individuals and communities, and also doing that, hopefully, I'm coming at it from a very American perspective as well in terms of free speech, not just from government oppression, but culturally. And I think people do have this expectation that you should be able to go out, if these are the new public squares, and debate one another and not have anyone tell you what you can or can't say. So get into what does that look like in practice?
But again, I'll go back to you can't debate anymore on these social media platforms, right? Because in the age of abundance, and because the business model helps it to go this way, because they want you to stay on the site longest, the emotion that's encouraged is moral outrage, and moral outrage becomes mob rule. Right? So is it a surprise, for example, that you have genocide in Myanmar? In Myanmar, both the UN and Facebook sent people there, and they know the role they played. And yet, like with 2016 and the IRA and the GRU in the US presidential elections, impunity continues. So this is, part of it is I want rule of law. Okay, now your question is, free speech. It isn't a free speech issue. It is, again, what you amplify. Imagine if the Atlantic decided, I'm going to make money at all costs, and I'm going to amplify the content that will make the most people angry because they will stay on my site the longest and they will share it the most. We don't do that because we have standards and ethics, right? You're laughing. That's my point. So it goes back. One of the things I really tried to distill is, what are the values that are there? And then, so here's a last thing that, I was talking about this with a friend. Corporate shareholder value above all costs. We have some platforms saying that, it's about the corporate shareholder. We're here to make money for them, so it's your problem. That's amoral. News people tend to actually, have standards and ethics. And you know what? We can be good business people also. We just won't take advantage of you. But anyway, so here's the problem. What happens where is the line where amoral becomes evil? Because we are back at the time of World War II. I mean, the last time.
Have we crossed that line?
I believe so.
When? Was it back in 2014 when instant articles came out, or more recent? Or before then?
I was with CNN when we grew from chicken noodle news to the world's breaking news leader. So I know how difficult and overwhelming it can be to revamp while the bus is going to change the tires, right? So I gave a lot of leeway. But now what we're seeing is the platforms are doubling down, some of them, and they're actually saying, it's up to you. But every day that there isn't a law, that there aren't guardrails in place, someone dies. Where's the line to evil? When you know people die because you're making more money and you continue doing it. So, yeah, I'm very angry. I try not to be angry. Wait, optimism. There is optimism,
okay.
Right? So the hope, where will the hope come from? Ukraine, okay? This is horrific, right? What we're seeing happening in Ukraine and what Russia has done. But how quickly did the free world come together, right? And all of a sudden, the world seems to be righting itself. But the platforms haven't really changed yet. And what sparked the change online? It wasn't a government, it was Zelensky.
I was going to say, I also feel that we're at the very beginning of understanding the platform's role in this. Like, we still don't have it's, all fog of war, et cetera, but we have a very limited sense of the information flow still.
I'm already in it's bad, really. I mean, I really feel the algorithm. So part of it is it's not feel, I can share the data. I'll tweet a few things after this, but, so in this one, I guess what I'm saying, so look, here's what's happening in the Philippines and with Zelensky. In the Philippines, Leni Robredo, who is our vice president, was sidelined during the last 6 years of the Duterte administration. I interviewed her right before I left for the United States, and she said there have been record crowds coming to her campaign rallies. And she said, Maria, it's so passionate. People don't go door to door in the Philippines, but people were going. And hundreds of thousands of people coming to her to her rallies. And she said, why didn't they do this sooner? But the reality is that she didn't declare sooner. There was no leader with those values, right? So it's a chicken or the egg. And I understood her anger. She explained it more in the interview where she said that she was alone. She felt very alone. We felt alone. And when you feel alone, you kind of you hunker down, but you get both angry and afraid. So now here we are. She's sparking something. Is it enough time? And that's simultaneous to watching what Zelensky was doing in Ukraine, right? If he had left one person, wouldn't the Russians have marched in?
And to be fair, he and others are using platforms to promote democracy, which is what sort of the utopian dream for the internet was.
But they are doing that as real people. That's the idea behind Facts First, right? It's not the design of the platforms. Again, I go back, the design of the platforms. This is by design a behavior modification system that sells us our weakest moments for profit. So this is a problematic thing. When it used to be advertisers, maybe we could survive. But
let me ask one more
not
question.
countries,
I want to
right?
make sure we're giving a chance to the audience to ask
Okay,
questions.
sorry,
My
I'll
last
shut
question.
up.
No. Before we go there, though, I want to ask what you think of Elon Musk being on the Twitter board.
I should turn this around on you, Adrienne.
No, you shouldn't.
I don't know. It's kind of like where we are right now, right? We know his track record, and that can be worrying, but it's a shift. And so far, and I'll tell you, in the Philippines, that data pipeline in our 4-tiered pyramid, some of it goes directly to the platforms, and Twitter is one of the platforms that immediately said yes. And you can see that they are proactive in dealing with disinformation. Will that change? I'll tell you what the data shows, but right now it's too soon to tell, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
Fair. Who has questions? Please just, if you raise your hand, I'll try to direct. We have some over here, please, and I'll try to make sure we get to people across the room.
I need to stand up. Should I stand up? Please, I'll stand up. Hi. Thank you so much for being here and for that very, very interesting conversation. I'm Cyrena Johnson-Roulier. I'm a professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm very interested in these issues. And I want to speak to something that you said regarding the fact that we do not yet feel safe. That we feel safe and we're not worried about our safety. And I immediately thought, when you said that that is only if you're not black or brown in this country. And so that led me to think about the fact that there is an enormous division between races in this country, and that division leads directly to voting and voting legislation, because if black Americans do not vote, then there's less possibility that Democrats will win. And so from there, I want to say that I'm also a journalist, and I'm scared, because what I'm doing is I'm writing from a position that is completely taboo in our country, because I grew up in a small town whose ideology is a cross between the transcendentalists and the utopian movement from the 19th century. What that means is that I'm black, but I didn't grow up black.
And I don't mean to cut you off. Is there a question?
Yes, there is a question. The question is, how would you approach these kinds of issues when right now it's about audience? And audiences choose what they want to see and what they want to think about. And so I'm just wondering how you would approach the complexity of this.
When you say audiences choose, that's a fundamental difference with me. I don't think you choose. You know, this black box of algorithmic amplification chooses for you. Yes, you may click on one or two things, but the overall micro-targeting that gets you the content that you think you chose is chosen by the platforms for surveillance capitalism. That's one. The problems in the real world are still there. They've just been made significantly worse by the virtual world, by the tech platforms. Because again, look at the IRA and the GRU, right? These were always vulnerable fault lines of society. And a leader tries to heal the fault lines. But if you want to get to the core of our societies, you pound them open, right? And when you have a leader who uses us against them, it is amplified. So I've seen this in my country. I think the other thing I'll mention is that it's in some ways you actually said it. You think identity politics is also really used against you to make all of us far more, what's the right word? To set us against each other. Right? I remember I said we all have much more in common than we have differences. I sound like a Pollyanna, but I've been a journalist for 36 years. That comes out of the experiences. We are being manipulated. Last thing I'll say on this, right? In Indonesia, and I'll take you to the world's largest Muslim population. In Indonesia, there were periods of times where they could not talk about race or ethnicity, or this was under the time of Suharto, right? Sara is what it's called in Indonesia. And so it was like they stifled all of this. And after Suharto, after almost 32 years of Suharto, this was lifted and it all came flying out. And I remembered in 1998 to 1999, going from city to city in 27 provinces where one group was literally trying to kill another. That's what happens when you suppress. But here's the other thing that also happened. When one group tries to use this against another, you also have open warfare. And what we're seeing globally is that these types of identity conflicts, fracture lines in society are being pushed open. So again, I can only say, in Indonesia, during the time of the religious violence between Muslims and Christians in Ambon. Ambon is 50-50 Christian. A grenade that was thrown in sparked the killing of almost 10,000 people thrown into a mosque. So who really did it? You don't know, right? But the point is that's what's happening in our minds. Sorry, that's not to downplay. I'm brown. I grew up in America. I grew up in Toms River, New Jersey, right? If we're fighting over here, then the real problem festers and we just get significantly worse.
Want to go to other questions, maybe over here? And if you could just please keep your questions short, then we'll have more time for more of them. I think right down the middle, sorry.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you very much for speaking with us. My name is Amina. I'm a student at the college from Egypt. And something you said about using free speech to stifle free speech really stuck with me. But I wanted to ask about what you do when disinformation, algorithms, the structure of the social web as a whole has silenced free speech to the extent that individuals, they no longer have the encouragement or need to not only engage with the politics that they're surrounded by, but have become silenced in their thoughts. And I'm not talking about everybody having the ability to engage in free speech. I'm talking about silencing when it's coming from the people that are in control, from the people that are in politics, a top-down structure where the algorithms are the politicians' tools. And so I wanted to know what kind of social reform or legislation that you think is able to regain that trust in those people. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, the methodology is we pump it, it's bottom up, the lies, and then comes top down from power, and that's part of what we have to deal with. In Washington, D.C., earlier this week, one of the things I kept saying is, let's stop thinking about Web 2.0. We are in a place where human rights activists, women, LGBTQ+, I said this in the Nobel lecture, those who are marginalized are further marginalized, right? You have Madeleine Albright, who actually, NDI had I think they celebrated this is gonna be their 6th year of trying to encourage women politicians in the United States and all around the world to stay in politics because it has become so toxic for women. Women journalists, a lot of American women journalists keep this stuff to themselves, because sometimes, hopefully not in the Atlantic, because you don't. But I mean, I've sat with women correspondents, strong women correspondents who, get these attacks and then they push it away. But the attack shouldn't have happened in the first place, right? So what do we do with that? Guardrails. So what are the laws? The reason why I think in the short term, the Section 230, which is probably not going to happen in the short term, but it was the only thing I could think of that would have any impact right now. Because the minute the platforms are responsible for what they amplify, for that content, they will take it down. They're very good about taking down terrorist content now. They're very good about IP, right? When it comes to money, they're very good at that. They can use the same things for this. That's one. Short term. Medium term is going to be, you have data privacy laws. National Privacy Commission has been pushing for this in the United States. You have 3 antitrust bills, David Sisselin, and you know, that huge report that came out, where is it, right? Lina Khan is pushing forward on some of this stuff. But here's where I saw the hope. March 26, the Market Services Act passed. The Democracy Action Plan of the EU finally moved out of content and is moving to the algorithms and must go to the black box of our data, right? But there are 2 parts of it, the Market Services Act and the Digital Services Act.
Well, in the US, we have such a long way to go, unfortunately.
You can't. You got to get moving on this, right?
I could stay and talk forever with Maria about this. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions. Before we go, I just want to say thank you so much, and in particular, thank you for continuing to fight for press freedom. It is so important and means so much to me personally and to all of our colleagues. So thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me.